Hey everyone, it's me, Kate. With everything going on in the world today, and especially the topic of sexual assault, I wanted to talk about my experience throughout life with sexual assault and how it's um, impacted my life as it does many, many people. There's so many people out there who are survivors of sexual assault. Men, women, young girls, young boys. It just seems to be an epidemic out there. And I thought it was time for me to really discuss behavior after sexual assault and the impact it has on a human being. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Um, when I was younger, I was a tomboy. I was always hanging around with the guys, climbing the trees, building forts. There wasn't many little girls in my neighborhood, so that's just the way it was. And I have fond memories of all of that. When I was 6 years old, um, one of my father's best friends in the military sexually molested me, I guess you could say. I was over playing with his son one day, and he was a tall man, a very tall man and a big man, and he had hands like, were huge. And being very naive and very young, and I didn't even know why or what happened. But I was playing with his son in his son's bedroom. We were playing with his toys. I was only 6. And he was staring at me while I was playing with his son, having a drink, He was home from sea, so anyway, I started getting this uncomfortable feeling as a little girl, like something was wrong, or just a sickly feeling in my stomach just by the way he was looking at me. And something told me within that I had to leave. I had to get out of there. So as I got up to leave, this man, a military man, was moving down the hall. And as I approached the kitchen to where the exit door was from the house, he grabbed me from behind and started putting his hands in my private area. Um, I wriggled and cried and said, "Please stop." And he was actually touching me in my genitalia, and I was just sick, like so sick, and I didn't know why this was happening. Because my parents did teach me that, nobody should ever touch your private area. But back in those days, in the early 60s, there was, the parents used to tell us that, but unfortunately, the abuser, or the pedophile in this case, once I started crying and hysterically screaming, trying to get away from him because I was only a tiny little girl, he actually continued to put his hands down my pants and tried to penetrate me with his hands. Um, Somehow I was able to kick and scream, and his son got upset. When his son came out to the kitchen, he let go of me, and all I remember is just running out that door, and there was this big field from their house to where the neighborhood was where I lived. And I don't know, it was like a complete blackout. All I remember me doing was running and running so fast and not thinking of anything, just had this extreme fear. And he told me before I, had left, that it was my fault. He said if I wasn't such a pretty little girl, he wouldn't have done this, but it was my fault because I was a pretty little girl. And to this day, I can't take compliments. The thing of it was, as I was running through the field and through the woods to get to my house, this fear I experienced, it was like I was running on air. Like literally, like my feet weren't hitting the ground. That's how it felt. When I arrived home, of course, my dad being a proud military man and my mom being, ill. And back in those days, you kept everything to yourself for fear because the abuser would say, you'll go to an orphanage, your parents won't believe you, it's your fault, it's, you'll end up in foster care. Um, so back in the early 60s, there was just nowhere to go, and people just didn't talk about it. So that was really disturbing to me as a young girl. Then at 7, my dad's stepbrother had come for a visit. He was divorced from his family. And, it was always nice having people from Newfoundland coming to visit and everything else because it was always lots of fun. The men would get drinking, the women were cooking, and all my cousins and I were running around. And it was always fun because it was like a big family, and it was great. So this time though, my Uncle Fonts came to Halifax to stay with my dad because he was going through a divorce. And uh, one night I'm sitting down in the rec room with my Uncle Fonts and we're watching TV, and he was like really sweet to me and kind, and then the next thing I knew, he was literally kissing me like a French kiss, with his tongue and that. And I was like a little girl, tomboy, and I was like, geez, no, I didn't say Jesus, but I was like, what's going on here? And I blacked out. The next thing I remember, my Uncle Fonts was taking me down to this Met. It was called the Met, the old Met. It was like a cheap store, like Walmart or whatever. And I remember he bought me this blue sweater that had like the belt. And again, I couldn't say anything or tell anyone. The saddest part about that is I was not his only victim. He was doing this to his own 2 children. And he also abused my other cousins, which was really sad when it all came to fruition. So this is the second time this has happened to me, and I'm just inside. I'm just a scared little girl, and really scared. And I couldn't tell my parents because I was petrified I'd end up in foster care. And there were so many bad stories about foster care back then, and how children were abused. And even though there was a lot of abuse in my home, physical abuse, I still didn't want to leave my home and end up going into foster care. So around 9 years old, I don't know if you guys remember if you're from Halifax, you remember, I don't know if this happened in other provinces, but the old farmer's milk truck used to come around and deliver milk. And my dad was at sea, and it was just my mom and I home, and my brother, of course. And excuse me. And one day, the farmer's milkman said to me, "Would you like to come on the truck and help me deliver milk?" And he said, "I'll pay you." And like Mom looked at me, she didn't think nothing of it. God love her. With her mental illness, I don't think she thought anything was going to happen. So, summertime, I wasn't in school, so I didn't think there was anything wrong with him, or anything. And so I hopped on the truck and, helped him deliver milk. And he'd always take me to this restaurant and get me a cheeseburger and fries. And And, you know, it went on for about a week or two. And he'd pay me money, plus I'd get free milk and chocolate milk to bring home to my mom and my brother. So, having already been sexually molested twice, I developed this sixth sense or this instinct that, you know, when something wasn't right, I had to listen to that. So this one day, he stopped the truck in Harrietsfield area, and he told me that he asked me if I knew how to swim, and of course I didn't know how to swim. And he said, "I can teach you how to swim." And he said, "See that lake?" And the lake was actually really far in the woods. You could see it from the roadway, but you'd have to go through, when I look at it now, like miles of trees to even get to that lake. So he said to me, he said, "What I want you to do," he said, "is bring your bathing suit." And he said, "I'll take you down to that lake and teach you how to drive." And something like told me this wasn't right. Like I couldn't understand how, little as I was my grandson's age, and thinking, how am I going to walk all that way to that lake? And then he persisted that I didn't put my bathing suit on under my clothes. He persisted in saying that I had to put my bathing suit on in the back of the milk truck. And right then and there, I knew something's wrong here. This is not normal. To make a long story short, I got sick to my stomach, nauseous. As a little girl, I was terrified of this man. I knew something wasn't right, and there was no way I was getting in that truck again with my bathing suit, and I'm changing into my bathing suit in the back of this truck. So I actually was able to stop him from doing anything to me because the next day, when I got home that day, I told Mom I wasn't going to work for the milk truck anymore. And Mom was upset because, you know, she was getting free milk and chocolate milk, and I was getting, like, you know, money to go to the store and buy things and the best cheeseburgers and fries ever. So I said, "Mommy, please," I said, "when he comes knocking at the door for me tomorrow, tell him I'm sick. I'm really sick, and I just can't do it." So he did come to the door the next day, and I was upstairs, and I was petrified. I thought Mom was going to make me go. And he told Mom, he said, where's Kathleen? He said, "Is she not coming on the truck today?" And my mother said, "No, she's not feeling well." And he persisted. He said, "Well, I was going to take her swimming." And Mom said, "What do you mean swimming? If she doesn't swim?" And, you know, the conversation went on. To make a long story short, he didn't come back after. And I never went outside the house when the milk truck would show up and he was there. I was that terrified of him, and I knew he was a bad guy, like my uncle and my father's best military friend. Nothing throughout the years happened until I reached the age of 15. And I was having issues as early as 15 with depression. I didn't know why, but just dark days, and I didn't feel like I wanted to do anything or go anywhere. I was like an honor student. I I was forever doing things to please my mom and dad because I always wanted to be a good girl, and I always wanted them to be proud of me, even though the situation was the way it was at home. Back in those days, every child was disciplined. We lived in a neighborhood that was mostly military or RCMP, and so we all got spankings or beatings or whatever, and that was our parents' way of ensuring we knew right from wrong and we didn't do anything wrong. But I've been working since I've been 13 years old, and I started working at Dominion on the Heron Cove Road, and I was young and, like I said, very naive. I wasn't street smart. I kept to myself even in school. I had friends at school, but nobody really close because even as young as I was, I had trust issues. And one night the manager of Dominion was driving me home from work. And when I got to my home, I noticed there was a police car in the driveway. And at first I was embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know why the police are there. I didn't know if Dad had been pulled over for drinking and driving, and a million things were going through my mind. And immediately I got that nauseous, sick feeling, because I didn't want there to be anything wrong. And then I thought, oh my God, my brother's in trouble. So my brother's 11 months younger than me. To make a long story short, excuse me, take a breath. When I went in, the police officer and his partner were sitting at the table. My brother had literally 14 was, went out drinking and got drunk and was doing drugs. And he took his friend's car on a joyride, hit it in a lamppost, and the police came. So I was pouring coffee. I had my Dominion uniform on. I was pouring coffee, and one certain police officer kept staring at me. And Mom and Dad were really concerned because they thought my brother was going to go to jail. They thought, he'd be taken from the family. And the strangest thing was, my brother literally knocked down a lamppost, the wiring and everything. So it was a big deal. And then they left that night, the police officers did. I don't remember my brother ever being charged or my parents ever paying a fine. And this particular police officer, Halifax City police officer, started showing up at my work at Dominion. And he smoked a pipe. And so he'd just ask, do you want to drive home? And to be honest with you, why wouldn't I trust a police officer? I was raised to trust all these people. And so he drove me home. And then he started coming to the house when he was on duty. He was patrolling the area, and he'd come in the house and talk to my mom and dad, but more so interested in talking with me. I didn't know I was 15. But, I wasn't thinking marriage or sex or anything like that. I could care less. I was just, hanging out. I was dating my first boyfriend, actually. He drove a yellow Camaro. God almighty, those days. And I was in love with him, really in love with him. But this police officer started asking if I wanted to go for drives. And again, he was a police officer, so I didn't see any reason not to, because police officers protect us. And I thought he was just being nice. I didn't have the sixth sense that anything would be wrong. So I started going for drives with him. My parents didn't care. It's not that they didn't care. They believed as well that he was just a nice police officer, and better I was in his company, they thought, than some guy from school. I was still a virgin, and the young guy I was dating, we were so in love, and I knew he was going to be my first. Three years from the age 15 to age 18. Stopped in 1981. He was sexually assaulting me. My mother did it. Her mental illness fought with my father and said, her exact words, I'll never forget, for what odds, Nobby, if he gets her pregnant, he can marry her. And my dad was not happy with it at all. And we never spoke about it. I was, excuse me, I was being bullied at school because this police officer would pick me up in a police car at school, and this is high school. Everybody thought I was a narc, and I wasn't. And I used to have a lot of problems in high school. That's when depression really began, and suicidal thoughts, and I couldn't understand why the teachers or the neighbors or my own parents weren't doing anything to stop it. And my first suicide was, I had, you know, I had oh, geez, God, this is gonna be easy to do. The young man I was in love with and thought I was going to be forever, when we were intimate for the first time, and I had told him I was a virgin. He was angry because he said I didn't bleed and I wasn't a virgin. And I couldn't tell him or anybody about what the police officer was doing because I didn't want anyone to know, because I was so ashamed. And he broke up with me, and I went to the doctor, and I got some pills, and it was exam time, I remember that. I went from an honor student right down to hardly going to school at all. So depressed. And I had no one to talk to, and no one to help me, or no one to get me out of the situation. So I swallowed the bottle of pills, and I didn't take enough, but Mom and Dad said I slept for 3 days. They didn't take me to a doctor or anything. So, like, I was literally all cold for 3 days. So, oh God, there's people listening. Thank you so much, guys. Because I'm doing this for young women, for all women. I just need to stay focused so I can just tell you guys, no. So, yeah, I tried to end my life. I used to steal my mother's Valium from her bottle to take myself, disassociate and try not to feel any pain. And in 1981, my dad was being transferred to Newfoundland through the military. And the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I'm going to get away from this man, this police officer. And I graduated early that year, but I just barely graduated. I couldn't focus in school. I really, my nerves were shot. It was such a big secret, and by this time I was so used to keeping secrets, and I felt things like, I'm not going to find a good man who's ever going to love me or marry me, because this horrible rape happened, and back then, women didn't go forward with rape, especially a 15-year-old. And I was being raped by a police officer. I didn't think anybody would believe me, and I'd rather die um, than have anybody in my school know that the police officer was actually raping me. He wasn't helping me. He wasn't being kind to me. Um, so we were posted in 1981 to George's Loop in St. John's, Newfoundland. And I was relieved. I was so relieved because this man, this police officer, couldn't hurt me anymore. But I was damaged emotionally, mentally, physically, and I didn't make, the right choices with the people that I eventually met. So in 1981, I worked with the Department of Tourism, and I worked on the Executive Council when Peckford was premier, and I didn't date anybody, didn't go anywhere, just stayed to myself because I was afraid if I dated anyone, they would hurt me. Well, the fighting in my home got so bad between my mom and dad, and the drinking and the fight, and I was just losing it. I was just a young girl. I was 18, and I couldn't take anymore, and I just wanted peace. I just wanted peace. It was either give me peace or I was going to take my life again. So I left Newfoundland, went back to Halifax, and I boarded with a lady and her daughter, and I worked, and paid my own way, and I ended up meeting a young military man who cared for me, and I thought he was a perfect gentleman because, he honestly didn't try anything. He wanted to wait for marriage, and that's how I was raised to believe that you saved it for marriage. And I certainly wasn't going to tell him that, I was raped or molested because I thought, wow, this could be a good life for me. However, we were married, and that marriage only lasted 3 months. Um, I didn't know what gay was. I honestly didn't know what gay was at the time. And it turned out that this particular young man had serious issues with inability to perform. And he would say it was my fault because he couldn't be intimate with me. And what he would do is beat me within inches of my life, blaming me because he couldn't perform sexually. And I tried, I tried, but I started thinking there really is something wrong with me. Started thinking, oh my God, and the beatings and the severity of the beatings, and every time, he would try, it was always a horrific beating afterwards. So I didn't want to die, but the only way I could get out of this abusive marriage. One night, 3 of his friends were visiting, and they were watching a hockey game. They were 3 military men. They were watching the hockey game. I came in the house, and he just started beating me right in front of these 3 guys, military guys, who I thought, like, military is, gentlemen, and they had a code of honor, and they did nothing. And I was bleeding, and I went over to the neighbors, and they gave me some kind of pills to help me sleep. I don't even know what they were. I had a prescription for, I think it was Cinequan, something like that. Restoril. It was Restoril. So in my mind, I literally had to plan a suicide. He was leaving for a NATO trip, and I knew once he got on that boat and was gone for 6 months, I could make my way out of this situation to some kind of safety. So the next day, I went back home. He didn't say anything. He used to terrorize me, and something really horrible, and I don't want this to upset you guys, but I had gotten a little white furry little kitten, and it was white and so tiny, and it was something that loved me and that I could love. And he took the kitten, the man I was married to, the military man, and he killed the kitten. And I don't want to go into the details because I don't want to upset anybody. And I was just losing it. So I went home that next day, and I got up in my bedroom in my bed, and we had eaves there, on the old military houses. And so what I did was I took enough of these pills to put me to sleep. And my plan was when I started to go to sleep, I'd just roll myself off the bed, an ambulance would come. And then once I got to the hospital, I would be able to tell them the danger I was in. So I did that. And when I got to hospital, I have to be honest with all of you, when the psychiatrist was asking me questions that I did know the answers to, I just said the wrong answers because I was so afraid they were going to tell him he could take me home. And I was terrified of him because he knew I had a fear of the dark. And one night he got off duty. He was supposed to be on duty, but he came home and I didn't know. I was upstairs blow drying my hair when all the lights went out in the house and it was pitch dark, and I was terrified of the dark. And I could hear someone coming up the stairs, and my heart was in my throat, and I thought, oh my God, this is it, and when I was screaming out, like, who's in the house, nobody answered. And then the door to the bedroom opened, and all I saw was the silver blade of the butcher knife that was given to us as a wedding present, set of knives, because I always loved to cook. And I just went berserk screaming. And he came, pushed the door open, and he started laughing hysterically. And I was like in the fetal position. I was still in shock. I didn't even know it was him. I just knew. I just thought I was going to be murdered. That was it. And then he left and went down, turned the lights on, came back up and said I was crazy and he was just joking. So it was just complete madness. I finally got out of this marriage. He was the one who filed for annulment. I didn't even think of those things because I was so damaged, and I wasn't street smart, and this was the recommendation for him to file for annulment. That would make me look like I was crazy. And of course I literally went into an institution, Campbell Hospital at the time, because I had some kind of break, and I was safe though. I was safe from my husband. I was 18. I was safe. 19, sorry. I was safe in the hospital. And when I was in the hospital, I told the doctors what was going on. He did go on his NATO trip. I got out of the hospital, and I remember taking him to the airport in Shearwater to get the boat, because the boat had left, and he stayed there until I was at a hospital. So I drove him to Shearwater, and I distinctly remember, just imagine, 19 years old, I got to the wooded area, stopped the car, I took off my wedding band and I threw it in the woods. I had, that was it. There's no going back. So two of my friends who were studying to be priests at the time hid me out at the School of Theology. And I wrote him a letter saying that I wasn't going back. I didn't even tell my mom and dad because I was afraid my father would literally kill him. So, and I didn't want my father to go to jail or anything. So all of that happened and passed, and I started working with the Department of National Defense and IT. Um, and I met and was engaged to my daughter's father. Um, and that didn't work. Um, and then in 1985, mom and dad was retiring from the military after 30 years and high ranking, and they were going to Newfoundland, and I had just had my daughter Jillian. So I said, I'm going to go to get out of Halifax. It'll be a fresh start. So God help me. So I went, and I lived with mom and dad on Sterling Crescent, and I started working with the RCMP on a contract. And I really believe I had PTSD back then and didn't know it, because when I was working with the RCMP, CID came down and wanted me to type a file. It was on a member of the RCMP, so it was an internal thing. And as I'm typing this file, it's an RCMP officer who was caught raping the Indigenous young girls on the reservation that he was stationed at. And as I'm typing this, I'm having flashbacks back to the police officer. I'm a mess. I can't even type it because when I'm listening, I have the earphones on, listening to his testimony. This was an RCMP officer, and I'm thinking, oh my God, all policemen are the same. Sorry, guys. And it was really traumatizing, and I really felt like I was losing my mind. Like, these things were not supposed to happen. Women, children were supposed to be protected by police. We're supposed to be protected by the military. Like, that's what I always thought. And this stuff doesn't happen to us with these men. We were supposed to be able to trust them. The military protects women and children. If we go to war, the police officers, protect women and children, because we were always seen as the weakest. And this was not happening. These were the very people that were hurting me. And again, I went into a bad depression, and I was throwing up while typing this very confidential file. His testimony and the words he said, the one thing I remember, his exact words were, when asked, why was he doing this? This is graphic. And he said, I just want to die effing a 16-year-old. And that was it. I couldn't do the file anymore. I left the RCMP because him doing that and my experience, what I went through being sexually assaulted for 3 years by a Halifax City police officer, I just couldn't handle this. This was just like something you'd see in movies. It was a nightmare. So the years went on. I ended up marrying a police officer. And I will just say that it was ungodly abusive. And I was in and out of hospital numerous occasions for abuse. He was an RNC officer, police officer. I don't know how it happened or why I married another, not another police officer, but a police officer with everything I'd been through, but I did. And myself and my children just barely got out of that alive. So I knew I had to get into therapy. I had to talk to somebody. I had to figure out why this was happening to me. And at a very young age, I did not like the act of intimacy or making love to anybody. I always felt sick, nauseous. The act itself was just gross to me. Like, and those were my words. When I was younger, I was never looking at anybody to like have an intimate relationship with. I just didn't want any part of it, which led to me questioning my own sexuality. And so I went in to see a psychiatrist to get therapy because I just didn't want to live the way I was living, always wanting to die, like hating myself, all the shame, the guilt, it was my fault, all this happened to me. There's something wrong with me because this continues to happen to me. The nightmares, the never feeling safe, the the constant um, fear, and my constant thinking that the only way was to kill myself. But by this time, I had two children, and I just knew if I wasn't here, I couldn't protect them from the things that happened to me. So I started seeing this psychiatrist who was a civilian psychiatrist in Newfoundland, but he also was a psychiatrist in Gagetown for military post 9/11 that were coming back with PTSD, and he was treating them. And I had, over the years, going to therapy, I just thought the world of him. He was actually the first person I have ever trusted in my entire life over anybody, because I was like my career was successful. I was raising my children, even though after my divorce with my ex-husband, the police officer, which was my second failed marriage, um, and I vowed never to marry again, and I didn't. Um, it was just it was just awful. It was just awful. Um, I finally got out of that marriage with my ex-husband, the police officer, and you know, he kept abusing women. He was being charged. They were calling me as a witness. Then the defense attorney, he had Danny Williams, who eventually became the premier of Newfoundland Labrador. It was his law firm that represented the police officers within the RNC when they were up on criminal charges. I didn't follow through on any of the statements. Like, I literally needed police escorts to come and get me and my children out of the situation. And they all knew he was abusing me, but they did nothing. Domestic violence is so common in Newfoundland, and it was back then. And the police officers, well, they just stuck together. It was the old boys group, and I didn't sign any um, forms to have him charged because I was terrified. And knowing that that was my ex-husband's true identity, I feared that if he lost his job as a police officer, he'd have no reason not to kill us. He literally held a rifle to myself and my two children one night, and I thought we were all going to die that night. So um, it was complete madness. So I'm seeing the psychiatrist after the divorce, and in 1990, it was March 6, 1990, I was crossing the street. It was a strange morning. My son was only 18 months old, and he was screaming and crying. hanging on to my pants, and he didn't want me to go. And that Christmas, I sold my car so I could give my children the best Christmas that they could ever have. So I was catching the bus, which was across the street, close to the two-story apartment complex that I lived in. And I was holding down 3 jobs. So that morning, like, it was really weird. I was even thinking of calling in sick and not going. I ended up um, I ended up leaving my son, who was I could still hear him crying. I had a live-in nanny, and he was still crying, and I'm thinking, what is going on? And that morning, all traffic stopped to let me cross, and there was this one guy speeding, and he wasn't looking where he was going, doing 70 miles an hour in a 50-kilometer zone, and next thing you know, all I remember hearing was the sound of my body when it hit his vehicle. So again, the psychiatrist helped me through all of that because I was having nightmares, the sound of the car, when it hit my body. I ended up in hospital September 1990, um, and was diagnosed with PTSD. Um, so years go by. Um, I ended up meeting somebody. Um, he was wanted by the FBI. I didn't know this. But the next thing you know, without going into detail, I was undercover with the Federal Bureau of Investigations for this person who was wanted by the FBI. And my mind is like, this is crazy, this is not happening, this is not real. But I had to do it because I had to protect my family, my children. I can't get into the details of the case. To make a long story short, when it all ended, I was given accommodation for bravery and courage, although I never felt brave or courageous. I was just being very, very calm and setting my mind to just be calm. I didn't want anybody shot or killed, police officers or this person. I just wanted to be calm. I can't get into the details of. He was finally apprehended. The FBI did come to St. John's, Newfoundland with the extradition papers, and he went back to the U.S. For trial. So this is all happening. Finally, years later, and this is years after battling the cancers and everything, I meet John, and John is a surgeon, and I've worked in healthcare. And I was happy. I was so happy. I was I was so happy. Like everything felt so normal. Um, we had 4 kids, 2 homes. I had everything I'd ever imagined. I felt like I was finally successful in my work and career, and I had this amazing man. And I think it worked so well because we were both workaholics, and there was never any time for intimacy, honestly. And I think that's why I was so happy in the relationship. I was continuing to see the psychiatrist. Um, in October of 2003, at the happiest time of my life, I was going to Fredericton. Uh, my aunt Teresa, had died, and I was going to visit my cousins and family in Fredericton. And the doctor, psychiatrist who was treating me, as I said, worked at CFB Gagetown as a psychiatrist for the military, and he had his office in St. John's. So I mentioned to him that I was going to Fredericton, because I wanted to see my cousins, and I loved my Aunt Teresa dearly. So he said, "Oh, I'm in CFB Gagetown this weekend as well." I never thought anything of it. Like, it was no big deal to me. Yeah, so okay, you're in Gagetown, I'm in Fredericton. Like, nothing. I had no reason to ever be afraid of this man who had helped me through some extraordinary difficulties in my life. Um, he was much older, and he used to be a priest before he left the priesthood and became a doctor and then became a psychiatrist. I had known him for years because I worked in healthcare, and I was best friends with his best friend's wife, Ruby, and everybody loved the psychiatrist, his patients, and that because, well, he was like a god to everybody. Nobody had anything bad to say about him, not even me. And life was good. Life was like I finally made it. However, the constant question of my sexuality was always lingering in the back of my head. So a week before I left for Fredericton, I actually went for a visit, the patient visit with the psychiatrist. And it took me 17 years to look at anyone and say this. And I said, Doctor, you've known me now for 17 years. I said, I think there's something wrong with me. And he said, what is that? And I said, I don't like sex. I have never had an orgasm with a man ever. And that is a fact. I just faked it and it was over. And he looked at me and he said, well, do you fantasize about women? And I said, no. I said, I don't fantasize about women. And he said, are you bisexual? I said, no. I said, I just don't like sex. And I didn't understand why. I'm just thinking I'm an abnormal woman because I don't like sex. And it's a major problem for me. And so anyway, never thought anything of it. And he said, well, if you're not fantasizing about women, he said, you're not gay. And I'm still confused. So anyway, a week later, I flew up to Fredericton, and I was staying at a hotel that was close to my family in Fredericton. And this this was the first night, so I was only there for the weekend, and a knock came to the door of the hotel that I was staying at, and I opened the door, and it was the psychiatrist, and I was like, "Oh, hi, how are you?" Like seriously, like. I'm sorry. He was the only human being in this world I trusted, but never ever imagined he would ever hurt me. He knew everything that had happened in my life. I never believed he would ever hurt me. He, being as naive as I was and not being, not, not thinking anything bad was going to happen. He had like a medical bag with him. Um, and I said, oh, I was just going to come in and see how you're doing. And so I said, oh, sure, because I had a suite, meaning that the bedroom was like separated, and there was like a little kitchenette and a living room, kind of thing with the kitchen table and chairs. And so um, he had wine, and he did ask me, he said, would you like a glass of wine? And I said, sure, why not? I did not think anything was going to happen. It wasn't even in my mind. I hate sex. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, but I do. He knew that. Uh, and he poured a glass of wine. I'd gone to the bathroom actually to pee, and he poured a glass of wine. I came back, so having a glass of wine, and all of a sudden, I was groggy and tired, like I wanted to sleep. And the next thing I remember, I woke up the next morning and he was gone. I knew something had happened because my private area was very sore, and I was a mess, and I had no clothes on, and I didn't remember putting myself to bed, and I knew he had sexually assaulted psychiatrist. Psychiatrist sexually assaulted me. The only person I could trust. He had my mind, my psyche, my life story, everything in the palm of his hands. And I didn't remember. I have this one vision that comes in my nightmares that I'm looking up at him and he's fiery red, like he has no shirt or anything on, but he's red, like his whole body, him is just red. And I don't know why, and I don't even know if that's a memory or not, but I have these nightmares, repetitive nightmares, that he's hurting me, and when I'm looking up at him, he's just red, like fire red. Like it's odd. For I it I jeepers, I'm so sorry. I I was in shock. Um, this was absolutely, I couldn't explain it to myself. I couldn't like even comprehend it. Um, I went numb. I remember going back early to St. John's. I remember thinking about John. What was my God? I can't tell John what happened. My partner at the time, who was a surgeon. Um, I can't say anything. Who would ever believe me? Um, but I was like really like damaged. Like I don't know what was going on the inside. I was numb. It's like I felt nothing. I felt no emotions. I felt nothing. Nothing. And this is the important part because it happens to all women that have been sexually assaulted. Um, I should have, looking back, I wish I'd gone right away to the police and reported it. Um, but I was scared and terrified, and I just believed no one would ever believe me because he was on a pedestal. He was well known for his work in psychiatry. He was just all powerful, and I was nobody. I was a nobody. I was nobody. I was just nobody. The following year, um, I had a couple suicide attempts. It got worse because the psychiatrist would call me at my work, and he'd call me from his work in between patients, and he'd start talking about how good it was for him, and describe in detail what he did that I had no memory of. And I was just getting sicker and sicker physically, and nauseated, and nightmares, and shaking, and my mind was going a million miles a minute. He wouldn't stop phoning me at work. He wouldn't stop phoning me at home. He just wouldn't stop. He just wouldn't stop tormenting me. I wouldn't go and see him. He, one night, put a bunch of medications into a brown paper envelope and dropped them off at my mailbox. And I took those medications, and by this time it's New Year's Eve, and I'm all alone with my children. We're in university and out of the house. And I get a phone call, and it's him again. He's in Gander, talking about how lonely he is New Year's Eve. I snapped. I tried to take my life. New Year's Eve wasn't successful. I was so angry at myself. I was stupid. I couldn't do nothing right. John had no idea, but he saw definite changes in me that I couldn't explain or couldn't talk to him about. Even my children did. They became withdrawn. Um, I was in shock. I was in shock. Finally, in April of 2004, John was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The psychiatrist was still calling me all the time. Wouldn't leave me alone. It was like he was obsessed. And I was very sick mentally, emotionally, physically. And remember clearly just walking out of my house on University Avenue. I don't even know how I got through the 4 lanes of traffic because I wasn't even in this world. I was walking to the health sciences complex, to the emergency, where I knew all the doctors and nurses. I literally snapped. I wasn't in this world. I wasn't, it was all surreal. I didn't feel anything. I had had a breakdown and I was admitted to hospital immediately. I told them what had happened. The nurses believed me and I didn't know why. The psychiatrist, one psychiatrist removed himself from any treatment with me and they brought on a female psychiatrist. And while I was in hospital, of course, the College of Physicians and Surgeons were calling me. They wanted my statement. They wanted, to get this dealt with. They asked me not to go to police. They wanted to handle it themselves. I wasn't even in this world. And the nurses would come and say, the College of Physicians and Surgeons have called, Kathleen. You do not have to answer the phone calls. And I couldn't understand why nobody would leave me alone and just give me peace. It ended up going public. He pled guilty. The psychiatrist pled guilty. I wasn't the only victim. There were other victims. I had no idea who had not gone forward. He lost his license to practice in St. John's, Newfoundland, and also in New Brunswick. And he lost his job with the Air Force. Even then, oh my God, I hated myself. I hated myself. Like, I just didn't want to be in. My children were devastated. They were old enough to know what was happening, and this was all in the media. I had guilt. The guilt was unbelievable because of what they were going through. And I moved to Belle Island, Newfoundland, with my mom and dad, which is 9 miles long, 3 miles wide. I never came out of the house. I never socialized. And it's been that way since the breakdown in 2004. This is now 2018. In 2011, I found my dad dead, and it was traumatizing. And as Mom wanted to come back to Halifax, and as we're reporting, we're about to leave for the airport, CBC calls me and they tell me that they wanted my opinion because the College of Physicians and Surgeons had told Dr. Hanley that he could teach psychiatry. Can you believe it? I would like to be sitting in on his ethics class. So they gave me a license to teach, and I lost it. This was just after finding my dad dead. I'm on my way to Halifax, and I'm not a human being anymore. I don't feel happiness, I don't feel joy, I don't feel anger, I don't feel sadness, I don't feel any emotion. I'm just a rock, just a just a shell of a human being. Just nothing. And I ended up, Mom and I, of course, Mom didn't like me at all. She was always calling me a whore, a whore, a whore. It was all my fault. It was really bad, and Mom was dying. And the stress got to me so bad that in December of 2011, I had a TIA, mini stroke. Then I was being rushed to hospital with stroke-like symptoms, but it was due to the PTSD and the trauma, where my brain would literally take stress, but when it got to a danger zone, my brain and body would literally shut down. And in 2014, CBC contacted me again. The military, CFB Cold Lake, had hired Dr. James Hanley back with a $200,000 signing bonus to treat the men and women coming back from Afghanistan and the war in Afghanistan. The military hired him back to treat the men and women coming back from overseas, going through PTSD. That was the day I died permanently inside. I am so sorry if I put a trigger warning on this. The reason why I wanted to talk to all of you is because there's so much going on in the world. There's sexual assault every day in the news, sexual assault, and men and people ask the questions like, why did they wait so long to say something? There's all kinds of stupid questions. And sexual assault is the most damaging crime committed to children and women and even men. My name is Kathleen Wiseman. I am a survivor of childhood sexual assault. I am a survivor of sexual molestation. I am a survivor of adult sexual assault. I am still here, and I wanted to reach out to all of you that have gone through sexual assault to say, we are not the bad guys. We are not the ones who did anything wrong. It was the people, the evil people, the perpetrators who were wrong for what they did to me, for what they did to anyone who's been sexually assaulted. It's on them. It's their behavior. It's their very bad behavior. It's on them, not us. And we need to start understanding that. And we need to know and believe that. And we have to find ways to heal, because if we don't, they win. They win. And the best revenge is finding healing and living, somehow finding a way to live. And and breathe and and never give up. And the suicide is not the answer, um, because then they win. Those responsible for hurting us, for sexually assaulting us, they win if we just stop breathing or we give up. They win, and I won't let them happen. I won't let them win. I love you all. I had to speak openly and honest, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, because I know there's so many of you out there who've gone through the same things as children and and adults, and maybe this helps somebody. Um, and I am asexual, and I'm that's who I am. I am not going to explain it or defend it or anything of the sort. I oh, excuse me. I am I am who I am, and I'm a good person, and I don't go out there to hurt anybody or to I don't like feel revenge. I I still feel like most days I'm just a shell. And the thing I focus on right now that keeps me alive is the love for my grandchildren and my daughter, my son. And as long as I'm on this earth, God damn it, no one will ever hurt them. No, they will never have to go through what I did. Thanks for listening. God bless you all. I'm going to have a good cry. But it's such a relief to get it all out there. And I encourage other women to do. If we can get our stories out and tell the truth about what happened and get it out, we could be helping so many other women heal and as a sisterhood, help each other heal, not tear each other down or judge each other, just together we can stop this from happening. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much to this whole group. Take care.